Hey everyone, Colin from Gaming Through the Ages here. This week, we're looking at Ys Memories of Celceta. Now, you might ask yourself, Colin, this is still sealed. How are you going to play Ys Memories of Celceta? Well, you see, I bought the game digitally because I thought this got lost in shipping, and then it arrived the next day. So, is this game good enough for me to have double dipped on? Let's find out. Ys Memories of Celceta is a remake, or perhaps a recreation, of the original Ys 4 games. However, chronologically, Ys Memories of Celceta takes place before The Oath in Filgana, which is why I'm playing it first. The story starts with Adol collapsing in front of an inn, having lost his memory. He learns that he's in the city of Kaznan, a city built on the outskirts of a gigantic forest. Adol had entered that forest, and that's all anyone seems to know. After helping out at the local mine, what, a mine is filled with monsters and you think Adol won't head in there? The Roman government tasks Adol with mapping out the forest, and this is the real meat of the plot. Adol explores the forest of Celceta alongside Durin, an information broker he had befriended before he lost his memory. As they explore, Adol and Durin find settlements that Adol had been to before, and they all seem none too happy to see him return. Adol does his adventuring thing and sets things right before heading back out to explore more and more of the forest, consistently gaining his memory back along the way. I'm not going to go into much more about the plot here, but I do want to highlight two lore reveals that I believe will contribute to our understanding of later games. The first is the origin of the Darklings, members of which group we had seen in Ys Origin. Apparently, the Darklings were a group of humans who rejected the teachings of the gods and sought to seize power for themselves. They ultimately failed, but they did inflict a large amount of destruction, and they fled to the forest of Celceta, where they would eventually found a kingdom. The second bit of lore is the existence of El Dil, a winged being that grants knowledge to those he deems worthy. He's a god, just like Rhea and Fina, so this game lets us see more about the gods. Like Rhea and Fina, he is not perfect. But unlike them, he has a dark side that, when he cannot control it, can turn out to be very destructive. Through our interactions with him, we learn more about the Darklings and more about the prehistory of the world. And all in all, I have to say, the story surprised me. As I've said before, I don't play the Ys games for story, but the story here is a bit more meaty than I expected. It's not perfect, and I feel that the companions are all kind of forgettable, but the lore reveals are interesting. I don't outright hate any of my companions, and the story's pacing is well done. So, all in all, I have no major complaints. Now, let's turn to the gameplay. Ys Memories of Celceta has a lot of new systems that we haven't encountered before. I'm not sure how much of them were originally from Ys 7, but we'll see that when we get there. By far, the most noticeable change is the presence of party members. By the end of the game, you'll have 6 party members, and 3 can be active at a time. The conceit of the system is that there are 3 combat styles, slash, strike, and pierce. Oftentimes, enemies will be resistant to 1 or 2 of these styles, but weak to a third. Therefore, you are incentivized to switch to the proper style in order to take enemies down. This is more important to do in the beginning, I found, than near the end. By the middle and end game, I was just mowing down enemies with Adol anyway, and I completely stopped switching characters unless I had a specific reason to do so. I get what the system is trying to do, right? They want you to experience different combat styles, and they built in a way to push you to try them. But they also recognize that some players, like me, will prefer to simply play as Adol so they don't make the enemies too tough. Yet I find this makes for an unsatisfactory design because it tries to strike a middle ground where it would have been better to commit to a system where I had to switch, as it feels like you have to early on, or a system where I never have to switch and only can if I want to. This middle ground feels more annoying than anything, but that's just me. Central to combat is the existence of special combat skills. These are attacks that require the use of SP and are mapped to different face buttons. You can learn them while leveling, and then you level them up by using them. It can be a lot of fun to earn a new skill level and see how dramatically the skill improved, and their very existence makes combat more fun and dynamic. You feel more powerful, and you're given more choices in the heat of battle, which is a good thing. Let me give a bit of advice to you guys, though, to avoid what I did. I decided that I was going to level up all of Adol's skills, so what I ended up doing was I used skills until I got them to max, and then I put them away and never used them because I had to level up other skills. While this is how I had to go about it to level them up, it also meant that I almost never used my most powerful skills, and I think that that was a mistake. You should decide what skills you like, level them up, and then be good to go. Speaking of leveling things up, Memories of Celceta adds a weapon enhancement setup far more complex than what we saw in Ys Origin. In this game, you level up weapons and armor by imbuing them with different materials. This can give it better base stats or even add elemental effects like inflicting paralysis or burning on the enemies. In theory, this is a great system because it means that resource gathering, which you can do pretty naturally throughout the world, contributes to player power. However, I found that the pace at which you acquire new weapons and armor makes this system almost useless. Why pour tons of money and resources into my weapon when I'm going to get a new one in a few hours? And no matter how much I upgraded my weapons and armor, the new versions always felt better. So it wasn't even a case where buying new ones only offered an alternative path. It is possible that this is best suited for higher difficulty levels, but on normal difficulty, I just ignored it a quarter of the way through the game. Finally, we come to the last substantial addition, which is the addition of quests. You can find various side quests to do at the inn of each town, usually after fulfilling that area's main story quest. These side quests can range from killing a certain kind of monster, to providing some items, to completing a small story scenario. You can be rewarded with items, materials, or cash money. At first, I made sure to do all of these, as the money was helpful, and I thought that the quests would be a good way to flesh out the world. However, much like the weapon upgrading system, I started to ignore it near the end game. I just couldn't be asked to do random tasks for random people when I wanted to get the game done with. Now the question becomes, is that a strength of the quest system, that I can ignore it? And is my lack of interest in it the game's fault, or is it mine? First off, I think it's a good thing that these quests end up being optional. You can get some pretty powerful stuff if you do the right quests, which players might want to get, but they're not required to beat the game, and that's a good thing. It allows me to plow forward and then just beat the game. Another thing I like about the quest system is that, oftentimes, new quests will appear in old areas after a story beat, giving you a good reason to continue exploring and getting to know the world better. That's all strengths to the system, but the problem is that the individual quests are boring, and the world isn't that interesting to explore. This system demands a certain amount of depth in the world that you'll find in a series like the Trail series, another Falcom property, but you won't find it here. In those games, I want to do the side quests because I care about the characters I've met along the way. In this game, I actively don't want to help them. I just want to get a move on. Ys Memories of Celceta is not a perfect game. We can see this in every facet of the game that I've talked about. They all have good ideas, but there are flaws in the implementation. That means that I can bypass the system, actively screw up the system, or ignore the system. This doesn't mean that Memories of Celceta is a bad game by any means, but it does mean that it's a flawed one. These structural flaws are compounded by a few more aspects that I want to touch on. Memories of Celceta, as I said, is a good game, but at first I thought it was a terrible one. Why? Because at the beginning of the game gives the player two options to shoot for: to find a tree in the middle of the forest, or a place by the river. These correspond to different villages that contain their own story beats and ultimately dungeons. So I picked the place by the river to head to first. Fuck me, right? That was the wrong choice. As I learned later, the levels of the enemies are balanced for you to go to the tree first. Doing that dungeon, I realized the game could actually be fun. But when I got to Celceta Village and did that storyline, everything took forever to kill. I took a bunch of damage, and the game just felt like an absolute slog. Now, I can see the argument where this is a good thing. The game gives you choice and lets you sequence break, as it were. And it is possible I did beat the Celceta Village dungeon. My problem is that the game does not make it clear in the slightest which is the preferred route, but is absolutely balanced for you to go a different way than I did in my natural exploration. I seriously thought the game was terrible until I got to Komodo Crater and realized I just did things in the wrong order. Also, who thought that underwater combat in this game was a good idea? It happens more frequently than you'd think, and it sucks the fun out of the game completely. Above ground, Adol can jump and swing and do all sorts of great stuff. Underwater, all he can do is thrust forward. That's it. Aiming your thrusts is difficult. Seaborne creatures seem to have a much easier time simply just moving around underwater than you are, and being underwater robs Adol of all of his mobility. I found myself skipping underwater combat whenever I could, even luring enemies out of the water so I could fight them on land, because the difference is simply that stark. Finally, I think the status effects last for way too long. I get that they're supposed to be annoying or debilitating, and some of them really are, like paralysis, and I get that they're not supposed to simply be convenient for the player. But some of these status effects take like 10 minutes for them to wear off naturally. I shit you not, I have literally gotten out of combat, set my controller down, went to make a peanut butter sandwich, came back, ate the sandwich, and was still not done being paralyzed. Unless I use my status healing items, this thing takes forever to wear off, and it slows the game down to a complete halt as I sit there and wait for it to go away. One could say that I'm supposed to use my items, and maybe I could have used them more frequently, but my instinct tells me that items are to clear up status effects while in combat. If I'm out of combat, I should wait for them to go away so as to not waste items. If they can go away without using a consumable, that's more efficient. That all being said, I spent a long time criticizing and kind of bitching about the game, and I stand by my criticisms. But I did find Memories of Celceta to be a fun game to play. Combat is fast and snappy, and the new skills are a lot of fun to use. Never once did I feel the need to grind, a first in this series so far. Exploring the forest feels good, not just because you're making progress in the game, but because the game rewards you for mapping it all out in 10% increments. That's a nice fusion of narrative and gameplay feedback that makes you feel like an adventurer. While the world lacks depth, the NPCs do have some charm to them, and I love the environments. Memories of Celceta is a good game. It's just that it's a flawed one, and its flaws are the things that jump out to me when I take the time to describe and analyze the game. To be honest, guys, I think I was a little bit overly negative in this review. I liked the game. It was a fun game. But it's the flaws that jump out at me when I'm trying to analyze it, and I couldn't let them be ignored. But underneath all of those flaws is a very fun experience that I enjoyed my time with, and I think you would enjoy your time with it as well. Next week is Christmas. It's December 25th, so I'll be having a little bit of an update video for you guys on that day as opposed to a normal review. But then to start off the new year on January 1st, we're going to take a look at Ys, the Othenfelgana, to kind of finish off this mini Ys marathon I got going on before we jump back into some other games. I hope you look forward to it. I certainly am. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. Share this video if you can, and subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.